It's not that he's going to create a new Holocaust, but he does admire not just Hitler, but President Xi and President Putin. He admires people who rule without checks and balances, legitimately elected people who don't have respect for the institutions of the system, take them apart. And would Trump do that if he can? I mean, yes, I think he would. And will he be surrounded in his second term by people who want to do that and will help him do that? Yes, I think it's very possible.
So I want to start with your recent piece in The Atlantic, which sparked a lot of buzz. And you could say it's something of a warning. The piece, the headline is, "Trump is speaking like Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini." Just to start, what compelled you to write this piece?
So the funny thing is, this piece to me seemed almost banal, because Trump has been using this language, which is a very specific language that comes from the 1930s. He's been doing it for a while, but it somehow it became more prominent and noticeable recently. And this is the language where he talks about his, the enemies within, the enemies of the people. And specifically, he talks about his political opponents and migrants also as vermin. He talks about migrants poisoning the blood of Americans. And this is language that it's not only comes from Hitler, it also comes from Stalin. And I wrote several books about Stalin and Stalinism. And just to jog my memory, I have a whole file of notes that I once took in the East German archives, or the Stasi archives. This is the archives of the East German secret police. And I typed the word vermin into the search line and discovered dozens of examples of the Stasi using it too. And it's not been part of American politics before. I mean, American politics have been racist before, and we've called one another traitors and unpatriotic and so on. We haven't talked about one another as being insects or vermin or parasites. And this comes from the language of regimes who saw their enemies as not citizens, as not necessarily human, as people who could be treated or destroyed any way that they liked. And all my piece it wasn't a very long piece. It just listed some of the things that Trump said and showed how that language had been used in the 1930s and 40s by others. But you're right, it caused some controversy because to people who are going to vote for Trump, this seems very offensive, and they alternatively wanted to dismiss it or deny it or say, but Biden and Harris are just as bad, even though, there's no evidence of that.
Yeah, so one of the probably the most prominent person who objected to the piece was Elon Musk, who obviously big Trump supporter these days. And he sort of mocked it as being, I guess, sensationalist would be his argument. What did you make of his response to it and the response more broadly?
So my piece is literally, it's almost a list. It's just citations.
Yeah.
And mocking it is one way to dismiss something that bothers you. I mean, I'm just quoting people. I didn't say Trump is Hitler. I didn't say Trump will cause a new Holocaust. And actually, what I think the danger of Trumpism is not some kind of Nazi, stormtrooper, some kind of scenes that you would recognize from movies about the Third Reich. I mean, I think the threat of Trumpism is something different. It's the threat of Trump assaulting and undermining institutions, which is how most democracies fail nowadays. They do so by slowly undermining judges, courts, bureaucrats. And so on. So so the piece wasn't saying he will be Hitler. The piece was just saying he's talking like Hitler, and it was also saying that he does so knowingly, and there's some evidence for that. He once said at one of his rallies, "I haven't read Mein Kampf." I mean, who randomly says I haven't read Mein Kampf? I mean, this is Hitler's famous sort of kind of anti-Semitic rant. You don't say that unless it's in the front of your brain. And so the explanation for it is that he's using this language because he thinks it will work. I mean, he thinks that it will appeal to some Americans, that it will create anger and division, which is what it did in Nazi Germany and in Stalin's Russia, by the way, and in communist East Germany. And it will give people the feeling that they're threatened by people or enemies who are something like illness or disease. And as I said, Musk's attitude is mock it, laugh at it, don't take it seriously. And that's one way of trying to ignore it or marginalize these quotations, they come from videos and tapes and rallies that we've all seen on television. So I didn't have to make anything up.
It ended up being very, very timely, the piece this week, because we had some new reporting from Jeffrey Goldberg, your editor at The Atlantic, who had comments from General John Kelly, who served as Trump's DHS secretary, his chief of staff, decorated four-star general. And he claimed that Trump said, among other things, "I need the kind of generals that Hitler had," and made the point that Trump, who previously had served as CEO of an organization in America, was upset that the generals and their pesky attitudes about respecting the law were getting in the way of what he wanted done. And the New York Times also reported that Trump had repeatedly praised Hitler in private and even said at one point that he did some good things. I should note the Trump campaign denied that he ever said this, but John Kelly is a man who is quite well regarded, served in Trump's administration, and it's unclear why he would make any of this up. What did you make of that reporting?
So first of all, John Kelly's been saying some of this off the record for a long time. So some of it I'd heard before. So it didn't surprise me. Also, I think it does reflect something about Trump's inclinations. Again, it's not that he's going to create a new Holocaust, but he does admire not just Hitler, but President Xi and President Putin. He admires people who rule without checks and balances, without the rule of law, without real legal opposition. People who have an absolutely unfettered ability to do whatever they want, which is, of course, the definition of an autocracy or a dictatorship. And that he would admire someone from history who's done that and well seems completely unsurprising to me, because he says versions of this all the time. And this, of course, in his first term in office, he was saying the same kinds of things, but at that time he was hemmed in by people like John Kelly and others who understood how the American political system works, namely that in the American system, soldiers in the army and generals swear an oath to the Constitution, not of personal loyalty to the president. And employees of the federal government also work on behalf of the Constitution and not as personal. They're not sidekicks of the president in most positions. And Trump was never able to get used to that. He found it difficult to understand. And he repeatedly, if you look back at the history of that administration, the constant clashes with people he was working with people in the military, it was always over that. So I'm not surprised at all. He also seems to know almost no history. Actually, Hitler's generals famously organized a plot to try and kill him. So wishing for Hitler's generals, if you think that means you're wishing for a super loyal military, is also amazingly mistaken. But it seems to be a piece of his idée fixe is the idea of absolute power and absolute control. And that seems to be what he wants. And so, that whether he's talking about his enemies as viruses who don't have to have any rights or any consideration, or whether he's talking about admiring Hitler, they seem to be part of the same aspect of his personality.
So just to talk about Trump's defense for a brief second, you're getting at this a little bit. There's a disconnect between what you're arguing, which is that in this piece that you wrote for The Atlantic and in Trump's latest comment, that he's not actually going to behave necessarily like Hitler or Mussolini would or Stalin would.
He won't be able to, at least not immediately. Yeah.
Right. And so whereas his defenders, like Elon Musk, let's say, will look at these kinds of arguments and look at what John Kelly says and dismiss it as ridiculous and absurd. We already had Trump in power once. He didn't commit a Holocaust, so why is everyone pretending that he's like Hitler? Whereas your argument is a little bit more nuanced, or a lot more nuanced than that, which is that He is using this kind of rhetoric because it excites people, in the same way that Hitler used that kind of rhetoric because it excites people, but then that he also would operate as president in ways that mimics strongmen, and because he has an appreciation for dictators, it doesn't necessarily mean that he would act like a dictator. To get to the concrete,
although I should say, I mean, the way democracies fall nowadays is usually not through a coup d'état or some kind of military, event. I mean, they fall through because legitimately elected people who don't have respect for the institutions of the system take them apart. And would Trump do that if he can? I mean, yes, I think he would. And will he be surrounded in his second term by people who want to do that and will help him do that? Yes, I think it's very possible. I mean, J.D. Vance has said openly things that sound very similar. Project 2025, produced by the Heritage Foundation, which has lots of people who either were served with him or close to him, contributed to it, is exactly that project.
Yeah.
So I'm adding an element of nuance, but that doesn't mean that, that you can dismiss it all or say, oh, it's a joke, or say, but Joe Biden told people to get vaccinated, which is what somebody said to me, and that's equally bad. I mean, there is something that he's saying to us, and he's warning us, and he's hoping it will help him win, and we should take it seriously.